I was definitely surprised by the fan reception when the season came out. Like, I just don't think I realized that like it was going to be so overwhelmingly positive. It's really cool to just like again, like I did not expect to get love Victor or love Simon messages, but I got so many of people just being like, hey, I know you're not Victor, but I wanted to reach out and tell you my story, and maybe I'll ask for advice and just tell me their story, tell me where they're from. And it's like super incredible to see those things and to like know that people feel so compelled by the show that they felt like the need to reach out. Like, that's so freaking cool, Getting to portray Victor in season 2 has been really exciting. A lot of times when people that are part of the LGBT community get represented on screen, it's like about a coming out story. I think it's refreshing that season 2, Victor has already come out, so we're past that part of the story. Now it's about him going through a path of self-discovery and what being gay means to him, but also what it means to the rest of the world. And I think that is really exciting because I feel like that is a direction of representation that we also should take as well. Hey MTV dudes, I'm Michael Cimino, and today we're talking about the top 5 things I learned from playing Victor in Love Victor. One of the top 5 things I've learned from being Victor and Love Victor is I think that like puts into perspective how much art is needed in our society, especially today's society. And I think that like, it shows how the power of art and how it has that effect, that everlasting effect to change other people's lives. I feel like there's a lot of movies, television, and books that like have made like a difference in my life. Some of which like I feel like I don't even know that made a change in my life, but like subconsciously they did, if that makes any sense. But I would say some of my top ones are like Inception and Interstellar as far as like movies go, because like I feel like it kind of inspired me to pursue acting even further, because it was like, all right, well, I watched this movie and I guess like it left me with that, after I left the theater, of like that gut-wrenching feeling for both movies. Christopher Nolan's a phenomenal director, really want to work with him. But like it left me with that gut-wrenching feeling, and I left and I was like, I can't wait to be in a project that like does that to people. You know what I mean? But then there's also books like The Alchemist that like put some things into perspective for me personally. And one line that really stuck out to me the most, that when you want something, the universe conspires to make it happen for you. And I think that that's like a really cool line, because it's like, no matter what happens, as long as you want it, you have the ability to make it happen as long as you work hard enough. And so that was kind of what I took from that. And yeah, like stuff like that really definitely does make a change in my life for sure. The next thing I learned from playing Victor is that it's maybe not the best thing to be a fixer. I've definitely have struggled with that trope for a very long time in my own personal life. And like I've stepped away from it, but I think that like, playing Victor has really kind of like put it into perspective how damaging it was in my life, because I was kind of watching it from a third party, if that makes any sense. Me personally, I kind of like always like just justified everyone else's actions around me, even if they weren't necessarily the correct ones. I've always been the type of person to approach things with like love and respect, right? And so even now to this day, I still feel like when people come at me with like hate or whatever, it's because it's based on their own preconceived notions and whatever else, right? But basically from that, there's some things that you just cannot justify. Through this show, I've kind of realized like the ramifications of like saying things that are hurtful. Like it might come from ignorance, but it's still hurtful. And sometimes it's like before I would just like let it slide, or just be like, oh, it's whatever, it's fine. Like I would just try not to like block it out, and just like if someone said like racist remark towards me that they maybe didn't necessarily know was racist or whatever, I would just like let it slide and just think it's whatever. But now I'm at a point in time in my life where I take ownership of who I am, and I'm like, I'm not gonna let that slide. That's not okay. And I think that is something I've learned from this for sure. The next thing I learned from playing Victor is how much my family means to me. I think that especially in the Latino culture, like family is like everything. Like I think that it's kind of like to all Black, brown, and Asian people, where it's like, yeah, like this really does mean something. Like our families mean so much more to us than I feel like a lot of other cultures. We have that bond where it's like, no matter what happens, because especially in the US, where our families most of the time have like immigrated here, have struggled to make something for us, for not even for them, but for generations after them. And I think that is something that like we kind of carry with us. that a lot of other people don't. The next thing I learned about playing Victor is how much I think as a person I took for granted just being able to love who I want to love. And I think that Love Victor definitely kind of put that into perspective for me, especially even just like kind of like talking to my cousin and like being able to just gain his perspective in preparation for the show, and especially for season 1. It kind of like put into perspective like how privileged I am, even though I am like a brown person, where it's like it was just like assumed like, oh yeah, like he likes girls and like that's totally cool and it's whatever, and it was just assumed. And you know, as a child, obviously like that you don't even, it doesn't affect you, but I'm sure as like children that are gay that kind of know, especially I feel like a lot of kids kind of know from like a very young age, you just don't really know how to express it, that it's like, damn, okay, like this is kind of crazy that like, you know, there's still so many people that aren't allowed to love who they want to love, where it's like even across the world where it's punishable by death, which is insane. And I think that like that definitely kind of offered me some perspective that I'm not necessarily ignorant to, but I guess like I knew about it, but it just didn't hit me as hard as it did until I started playing Victor. Playing Victor made me check my privilege for sure. Like I think that even though like I've definitely faced like a lot of racism growing up and stuff like that, like it makes me understand that like I need to leverage my privilege to kind of help other communities, especially if they're struggling. The last thing I learned from playing Victor is sometimes on a show like Love Victor, the overarching message is so freaking important. What's incredible is that you will get a group of people that will honor this and be just, because I feel like a lot of times as actors, they kind of go into projects like thinking like, okay, well, this is another job, right? But throughout the process of Love Victor, like I've created like family, you know, like I love everyone that is part of this show. And I think that like, I didn't know that I can meet people that were so talented and sweet at the same time, which is like, because I feel like a lot of times in especially in stereotypical Hollywood, it's like told to us that like everyone in this world is like super rude and, you know, like super diva-y, but I've met nothing but the kindest people on this project. And even down to every PA, every crew member, all of them have made this just so incredible. And I think that's probably another little extra tidbit, is that like without every single person, this would not be possible. And every single person puts in like that good energy, that like working hard, and that's what makes Love Victor Love Victor. If there was season 3 of Love Victor, I would love to see Victor kind of taking on the world as a not necessarily more experienced gay man, but more of a point of view of a gay man that knows what being gay means to him. By the end of season 2, he kind of has ownership of being a gay man in this new world. And I would like to see him exploring what that means even further, depicting that kind of energy of like where he's like, all right, now I'm much more comfortable with my sexuality. What does that mean to the rest of the world? What does that mean to me? Now that I like have taken ownership over that, like let's explore new things. Like let's kind of like push the boundary of like his sexual identity.